having Jason Rucker and Stormy Hammer presenting Unlocking the Wisdom of Ancient Haida Canoes.
Holy smokes. Oh, this is a rough looking crowd. I was just asking Jason how we got into this, and I was mostly blaming it on him, and then he tried to pass it off to somebody over here. What do we, so Jason and I have very different styles and very different, we're very different pieces in this puzzle, and our presenting style is vastly different. So what seems to work for us is Jason kind of MCs, and then we see what Stormy does.
Yeah. So far, so good.
Yeah. Yeah. Where are we at, MC?
This is the thanks to our hosts. Thanks to our hosts.
Okay, well, yeah, thanks to the host, absolutely. You know, I've been to the boat festival a few times, and it's been amazing every single time. And, you know, we are very grateful to be here and, you know, appreciate the hospitality of everyone and, you know, acknowledge the long use of this area by many peoples. And, you know, we're all here today and really grateful for it.
And in addition to that, we'd like to thank all of you for being here. We're both really excited to be here with this audience. We're excited to share the work that we get to do, and part of the excitement for us is in sharing it. And in this group, we have a really cool collection of people who obviously have a lot of ways of thinking about this from the maritime perspective. And we just want to welcome everyone, all of those people with all of those perspectives, as well as if this is an introduction to you of these topics and you don't know anything about this, we want to welcome you as well, because we really appreciate the connecting with people around this topic and figuring out where to go from here. So thank you for being here. And then a little bit about who we are.
Who are these people? Well, my name is Stormy. I was born on a stormy night in southeast Alaska. And, you know, I have, not sure how to solve that. 57 as far as genetics goes, but as far as this conversation, my Haida ancestry comes from my mother, and I was born in Ketchikan, the nearest hospital from where we lived in Kasaan Bay at the time. I grew up on a little float house, you know, a raft of logs that my family had put together, and you know, I lived on that my entire childhood. My dad was, he's not gone, but at the time he was an A-frame logger, a fisherman, and we trapped in the wintertime. Anyway, lived very close to the land and the water and all the other things above and below. Try not to get too long-winded here, but since, you know, we are not only talking about canoes, but we're talking about culture and changes. You know, we heard some of the ones from Leslie, and you might hear some more in this talk. When I was a little kid,
from Midwestern and Eastern, East Coast ancestry, and met Stormy on a trip that we took out of California. So that's kind of where I'm from. And in my terms of how I got to be connected with this, the part of my life that connects me here is I've been into boats and wooden boats my whole life, and I got to work at the San Francisco Maritime National Historical Park for about 20 years, doing all kinds of fun stuff. From restoration work to being the captain of a historic vessel there to all kinds of fun stuff, including measuring and drawing historic small boats. And got to do that and got really into that. Left with my family on a trip around the Pacific in 2018, and a few years later met Stormy, where he lives in Alaska. And so really fortuitous meeting that we'll talk about a little bit later, but those are the two things that brought me to this work, is my maritime work and then my sailing with my family. And without further ado, this is Stormy and I. Last May, we went into the forest. Am I getting feedback here? Last May.
Can I just interject here for a second? This, we have an hour, and it's really not enough time to get the point across that we're trying to, or the points. So, you have to kind of keep track of everything you hear over the course of the next hour so that you get what happens at the end. Is that?
I guess at the risk of going off on a tangent here, I do like to say that there is a lot to cover here. There's more than we can cover in an hour, so we're going to try to move really fast, even though we're not doing it quite yet, but there is a lot to cover. The other thing that I'll say that adds on to my being from East Coast and Midwestern ancestry is I am not Haida, and I'm not a Haida historian, and I hope to be able to stand back enough to let Stormy tell those parts of the story, because they're really his story. Last May, we went into the forest, and we went together to the forest to visit this ancient canoe. This canoe has been in the forest for at least 100, probably more than 125 years, and it is in rough shape. It's been sitting in the forest, covered in moss. It's been out in the elements all year round for all that time. Despite its rough shape, our belief is that this canoe holds information, holds secrets that aren't available anywhere else. So that's why we went there. We're going to come back to that canoe, but there's a lot to cover to make sense of that canoe. So where are we going first? We're going to go to Southeast Alaska to learn about Haida Canoe, the mission of Stormy's Haida Canoe Revitalization Group, and the documentation work that we're doing and why we're doing it. Lots to cover. Here we go. The overview of where we are geographically. This is of course our Pacific Northwest. We're going to zoom into that little box there, and Stormy can tell you a little bit about Haida territory there.
Well, let's see. What exactly is there? Something specific, Jason, that should be coming across? I mean, it's the little circle. That's where I and my family live. This whole area is current Haida territory. I imagine over time boundaries have moved around, etc. I suppose one thing that's worth noting, probably pretty apparent to folks in this group, but when you live in a place like this, you need a good boat.
Yeah, more even than the rest of BC and Alaska, both Prince of Wales and Haida Gwaii are quite a bit offshore. So this is a real maritime place in the world. A little bit about that water world, Stormy, while we watch the video again. Just the experience of growing up in a watery world. Anything? No?
Well, this is kind of a great one because, I just grew up here and, in this place, and when other people come there, sometimes they point out things, and I'm like, I never really thought about that, because it's just the way it is. And it's the way it's always been, and I hope it's the way it always will be. Some of the things I'll try and think of here, growing up on the float, of course, you're surrounded by water. As a little kid, you're falling into it, you're always wearing a life jacket. I never liked being in the water, I do like being on it, but I don't swim, so, hopefully we can make some good boats. My brother and I had to go to school all the time. This is just a little bit more about me, but we had to go to school in a boat, and we were fortunate enough to find an old dugout canoe of a different style, but same length, 30 feet. And someone had built it, probably decades before I became a kid. And they had also incorporated a homemade outboard bracket. So my brother and I put a 6-horse Evinrude on there, and we use it for the next 10 years to go back and forth to school. And Jason can give you all kinds of perspectives about what it's like when he showed up, because it's different than the place where he lives.
Well, I guess that's it. Stormy talks about other people, and I'm an outsider who showed up in this place and was just blown away by the notion that it was the water that connects various villages in this part of the world. You know, and it's just the islands within bays, and bays within those islands, and more islands within those bays. It goes on and on. And the meeting of the water and the landscape there is a beautiful thing, and it creates a way of life that is foreign to me and a beautiful thing.
Yeah, Jason once, well, a couple times I've heard him mention that there are no inland villages, and every time I hear him say that, I'm like, why would there be?
We'll talk more about the Haida village, but why would there be? So, Stormy and I come back to this day often in our conversations. We were coming through Southeast Alaska. It was the tail end of COVID. Stormy and Bonnie had not had a visitor in their carving shed in, I think, a couple of years. And by dint of our working hard to get there, sailing to get there, and showing up on his doorstep, Stormy brought us into the shed. We were the first visitors that happened in 2 years. I didn't know a thing about any of this, and I was blown away. I was blown away by the craftsmanship of these canoes, by the genius of the design of these canoes, the genius held within them, and by Stormy's vision and drive to perpetuate the canoe carving tradition, and in doing that, the broader Haida culture. So it was a mind-blowing day for me, and we had a long conversation. We'll come back to that, but that's what got all of this work started.
Jason, so there's more than that in this photograph. Yeah. He's my MC, so I got to follow him somewhat, but on this day, this is like during the middle of the pandemic, and our community of Kasaan was pretty closed off. You know, it wasn't really asking a bunch of folks to come into our community. I mean, plenty of people. I'll leave that part at that. But anyway, my wife and I are visiting at home one day, and a vehicle pulls up outside, and a couple folks get out. You know, I step outside the house, and someone says, "This looks kind of like an art place. We were just kind of wondering what's going on here." And I said, "Well, we're kind of shut down, you know, during the pandemic, whatever." And you know, the person says, "Well, we were just passing through on a sailboat," and I was like, "You guys want to check out a canoe?" So we go back here, and you know, back in my tent, and you know, we're looking at this canoe that I needed to get finished at the time. And I'm just rambling on. I'm just, you know, like, I'm going on and on about canoe making and, you know, what I know about it and what I don't know. And
Stormy hasn't talked to anybody about canoes in 2 years.
Well, except for Bonnie and my wife over here. But, you know, anyway, I really got to talking about this canoe that I had just recently discovered but not yet seen up in a museum in Skagway, up in the northern part of Southeast Alaska. And I was very excited about it, and I also think I started rambling on about how it would be really great to get up there and see it, and also make a lines drawing of this canoe, because a lines drawing is a great way to, you know, really bring the shape of the canoe into your living room without actually bringing a canoe, and making comparisons with other lines drawings right there on the table. Real simple, coffee at hand, you know, all these kinds of things. And, you know, these amazing people here that we're visiting, they're kind of quiet. They're not really saying much the whole time. They're just listening to me, and I'm just the whole time like, I don't know if they're interested or not. And at least the way it is in my memory, as we're leaving the tent, after going on for a long time, there's some amazing person who's in this room somewhere who says, "Jason, I think you need to tell this guy what you do for a living." And he's like, "I make lines drawings." You people exist? It was incredible.
It was incredible. It was pretty great. And Stormy said, we gotta go up there, and I said, yeah, let's do that. That was later in his presentation, but it's okay. But it was an amazing thing. We come back to it all the time, that there we were.
Yeah, after he come in from sailing, oh shit, yeah, bring this up. He and his family were sailing around the whole Pacific Ocean on an amazing sailboat that is down here at the dock, their family home for a number of years going around the ocean, which is today for sale to the right.
I wasn't going to make that pitch, but we'll talk about that. Yeah, that's another talk. But in any case, we did. We sailed around. We ended up. We sailed. Yeah, I like to say I sailed 16,000 miles to find Stormy in this work. Stormy, a little bit about the water focused. We've already gone there, but the water focused village and culture. Yeah.
So yeah, we did talk a little bit, of course, the need for a good boat, and different theories on how this all comes about. I wasn't around 1,000 years ago, or 10,000, 20,000, so I can really only kind of speculate and wonder about it all. But nonetheless, what happened was some people came up with some amazing, amazing watercraft. And people around, I know this is a different place too, but it's right here, fine. Around the world, people have made dugout canoes for thousands of years, and it has influenced their lives in great ways. It's taken lives, it's changed lives, it's improved lives, all these different things. And for whatever reason, in this little region you saw on the chart earlier, people took it to just an incredible level to where when you see these are dugout canoes here on the beach. They don't look like the log they were carved from anymore. They're beautiful. I mean, the log's beautiful too, but they've really transformed. And there's a kind of an amazing process that goes along with that. I guess we still have 45 minutes to talk about that.
Yeah, and this too is one of those shots that shows you the village, that every house faces the beach. Every house has the totem pole in front of it. Every house has canoes. And as Stormy said, when I said it's an amazing thing, every house, every Haida house faces the beach historically, and today Haida villages are on the shore. And Stormy said, yeah, of course. But every house faces the beach. It just kind of it highlights this focus towards the water. I guess we're a little out of order here, but I'll just Stormy. This is a historic Haida longhouse in Kasaan with a historic pole in front of it. We were going to talk about something in the last slide, but I guess I'll just say here that Stormy does a lot of amazing things. He carves these exquisite canoes that you're going to see here in a minute, but he also restores and carves his own poles. And this house is it's one of the most powerful places that my family has been. It's a historic house, and it was in really rough shape in the kind of early 2000s. And Stormy and a crew of family and friends rebuilt it using traditional tools and methods. And it's entirely built of cedar, entirely shaped by hand. It is a powerful place. And we're off track with that. It's a powerful place to be in, and it speaks to the broader support of the culture, I think, that Stormy's driving towards.
Right, Jason, I don't know if we were going to do this in a different place, but I think we had a picture here in another presentation that was similar but different. And what I talked about then was that in the old days and in the new days, people use cedar. And it's just really critical to the culture. You know, the people in Cedar have been together for so long. And it's not only people in Cedar, but for the purposes of this short talk, we'll just kind of stick with that in a moment. But, you know, you can see a house built of cedar. You can see a totem pole built of cedar. You've seen pictures of canoes built of cedar. You know, it's possible we may have some pictures on here that show some clothing. And you heard about this from Leslie if you were here in the prior talk, you know, about folks, clothing. But, you know, there's all these things which are, you know, inseparable essentially from the culture. You know, if we separate those things, we're going to end up with something different. It's not going to be the same culture in my estimation. And so I say that because I feel like it's really important to perpetuate the red cedar in the way that it was done before. You know, we need to take care of it. We need to be respectful and make sure that it exists 1,000 years from now, 10,000 years from now, on into eternity, of a quality that is useful for doing all of these things. Weaving a hat, you know, making other types of clothing, carving a canoe, building a house, making a route, whatever the case may be. It's really important to remember that all of these things are connected, and we can't only focus on one thing. We need to keep in mind that these other things are critical to the perpetuation of, in this case, this particular culture, but I think that applies across cultures. You know, you need certain things for certain cultures to exist.
And that brings us to the canoes, the Haida canoe. A little bit about the overall what we used for, different sizes.
Love this picture. Love it. I was looking at it again with Jason this morning. It's a beauty. This is at the, you know, basically the northern part of southeast Alaska. And I believe this is the Taya River up near Skagway. And you can see in here, of course, there's many canoes. There's even a few plank rowboats in there. But you can see some different styles. So, you know, we've got this style here that has the nice sweeping ends, and then we have some other ones that are a little double ender style. A few different styles there. The ones that I'm really focusing on is this, you know, the type you're witnessing here with these sweeping ends. And there's a few different styles, but this one I like. It has been referred to as, I'll be careful to not say who said it, but like someone called it the station wagon. And I love that. You know, I just love it because, you know, this canoe was loved and used and carried people and their goods and, you know, their lives all over the place. From here to there, where this picture was taken, and beyond in all directions, essentially. So really, really powerful canoe. It doesn't get enough
Shift towards a real focus on both canoe shape, canoe design, and canoe construction here. And as the outsider, I guess I would just say that feeling I had when I walked in the shed was that this is not what you think of as a dugout vessel. This is an ocean-going, seaworthy craft. And it's immediately apparent that it's not log-shaped. Things that I noticed immediately are that graceful sweeping sheer, the cutaway bow. This is actually the bow of the boat with this beautiful cutaway, the knife-shaped entry that cuts the water, flare that sheds the water. I can keep going, but you can chime in on shape if you want, Stormy.
I'm going to, but it may not be what you're anticipating.
Can you talk closer to the mic, please, Jason?
Yes, I just feel like I'm doing feedback here, but I'll speak right here. Stormy.
That was very nice, Jason. You know, this, you can see it's floating, right? It's floating. It's doing what it's supposed to do. But I've studied these things quite a bit, you know, like I've been around boats. I study photographs of old canoes. I imagine them in my sleep. I go to museums and look at them. The old timers would probably just turn this thing loose, right? Like, and be like, hey kid, what's the problem? You can do better than that. You know, the true, in my estimation, the true masters, you know, they were probably the folks kind of around the end of the 1800s, and a few of them made it into the 19s, but, you know, they had all this experience of generations over thousands of years, and you can see, you know, all of that coming out in what they produce. When I look at those photographs, and you know, I mean, I can just right now in my mind imagine one of those old canoes right there, and the old ones are so much better. So the reason I'm saying that is because it's part of the reason why we're here, right? Is to, you know, discover what needs to be discovered so that more people can do more better in their canoe making.
That being said, Stormy carved a pretty beautiful canoe. This is a shot from the stern. Again, you see that graceful sheer, hollow stern, a view from the side there where you can see just how graceful the boat is. And again, it's just not shaped like a log, it's shaped like a sail, a really seaworthy watercraft. From just a glimpse of the shape, we're going to move into the carving of canoes, and Stormy's going to kind of walk us through the basics of that.
Yep, we'll keep this pretty basic, but you know, essentially, the reason that the Haida canoes look so drastically different from the log they were carved from is because that once you reach a certain point and the main portion of your carving is complete, you heat the entire thing up, the whole boat. You heat it up until the wood becomes pliable enough that you can change its shape. And it seems like now, like earlier times, that maybe the best way to do that is to, are we going to use the model?
Yeah.
Right here?
We were ahead of schedule, but that's all right. I mean, do you want to go through the basics of carving before we get to the model? Or do you want, you know? Okay, you gotta go first.
Anyway, you carve
a canoe.
You never know what you might find inside the model. You just don't know what you're going to find until you get inside it. But this is Bonnie and I's oldest granddaughter, Uli, here. And, you know, she's in there for lots of reasons. She's having a good time, but also she's learning intergenerationally, right? This is what I think brings about the best result. And hopefully we'll see a lot more folks like that doing similar things. But essentially, you know, getting back to the steaming process is what people often got in the habit of calling it. You know, we're carving out the canoe, getting it all hollowed out. You know, sides are all thinned down, all these things, but it's not the final shape. It still has some of the log characteristics to it, still a little bit overly round, etc. And so, in order to change the shape, yeah, we're gonna.
So I just got to interject that for people who are familiar with this, kind of like we talked about before, for an outsider coming into Stormy's carving shed and having him explain how the whole canoe is steamed and reshaped, I nearly fell over. Stormy talks about it as if it's an everyday occurrence, and it is a regular thing. We all, you know, in the maritime community, people know about steam bending wood. We steam bend frames, we steam bend planks, we steam bend coamings, we steam bend all kinds of parts of boats, but you don't steam bend a whole boat. And so when Stormy explained that to me, I couldn't believe it. And so, but we talked about it more, and Stormy's made me understand it. I have not been to the steaming of a canoe, but in any case, to demonstrate and start to talk about how this works. You want to talk through the process on the beach? The canoe is brought from the woods where it's carved to the beach to be steamed. And then...
Yeah, except for in the case where you put it in your tent like I did, and do the carving in there, which is actually, turns out it has some challenges. I thought it was interesting going from, the smaller canoes that I had carved, like some of the smaller ones, 10 feet long was the smallest one, and then like 14, 18 feet, these kinds of things. Still inside my tent, I could get back and bring the whole thing into my field of view. Turns out 30 feet I couldn't. I could only see a little segment at a time, so that was a whole new challenge in the mind-bending aspect of trying to get the shape right. If you don't get that initial shape within certain parameters, and I would argue that the old-timers have those parameters, they know that. I don't necessarily know that, and I would say that most folks today probably don't know that. Thankfully, there are a few folks who have gotten within them and been successful. There are way too many stories of, I know it's not the place probably, Jason, look at my MC over here, but there are way too many stories in my area of people trying to make a canoe, and they do the carving, they do a lot of thinking and studying, and they carve the canoe out. And then they get to the part where they have to steam it, and a few things happen. I know of instances where they fill the canoe with the water and rocks, as I didn't explain yet, and then nothing happens. They try to change the shape of their canoe, nothing. It's sad for me because so much is lost when they're not successful. And other times, what has happened is they get to the steaming and they go through the process and they develop huge cracks in their canoe, that they're not able to fix. And additional to that tragedy, when most people put in a whole bunch of effort, hundreds, possibly even thousands of hours into a project, and then they have a catastrophic failure or nothing goes anywhere close to right, they don't do it again. They learn from that, and they're like, I'm not going to do that again. But that is super unfortunate, because the more we do it, in general, the better we're going to get at it. Even if it's not us getting better, our neighbor gets better, somebody else gets better, we're all kind of learning together in this process. And so now, we're going to go backwards and talk about the steaming, but when we get to this moment, were you going to say something, Jason?
No.
Okay. So when we get to this moment, we've carved the canoe out, and it's this canoe-like shape, but it's not the final shape yet. And so a really great place to do the steaming is at the beach, like you can see in this photo. And reason being, you just got resources there. And there's water, rocks, driftwood for firewood. So what do? We support our canoe. We've got a little model here. And we're supporting our canoe kind of near the ends, yep. And we're putting in some water.
Water goes in the canoe.
A few inches, or if you're on the metric system, you can do this in some other form. We put the water in there, just the right amount, not too much, not too little. Running out of time.
Let's steam this canoe.
Okay, let's get this puppy steamed. So the water's in. Now you didn't know this, but we already heated some rocks up in a fire. They're just glowing hot. They're kind of a manageable size. We take these stones, we put them down into the water. It starts boiling pretty violently. We cover the whole thing up, not with the amazing red cedar bark mats they would have used in the old days, but with some hardware store tarps or plastic to contain the heat. And we listen to the boiling and the sizzling, and when it settles down, we put some fresh hot rocks in there. And be careful with your fingers. So they are hot. In a little while, you know, a few hours go by, and the wood is heated thoroughly enough all the way through that what will happen if you carved it somewhere in the neighborhood correctly, just the weight of all of those things pushing down as that wood becomes softer and more malleable, it'll just kind of, you know, push the belly down a little bit, the ends will come up, sides will come out, and you know, you have something that no longer looks like a log. And at that point, you can just put in some temporary braces and, you know, let it cool off. Later, you can put your permanent fixtures in.
Radically transformed. Radically transformed. Yeah, thank you. Again, from a perspective of not having done this, it's just incredible. But we did get to do some measuring of a couple of models, of a couple of canoes of Stormy's that helped to illustrate this as well. And this is pretty fun. This is a model of an 18-foot canoe that has not been steamed. It's in Stormy's carving shed. And you can see how this canoe is rather log-shaped. We can put sections through that canoe, as Leslie mentioned in her presentation. These sections kind of start to get at how we make lines drawings. Each one of those sections has a different shape, and it helps us to see the shape of the canoe. If we get rid of the model, you can see those shapes there. If we get rid of the planes, you can see the lines, and you can see that midship section right in the middle of the canoe is really cylindrical, really log-shaped. So this is the shape of the unsteamed canoe. And we're going to go over to the steamed canoe here in just a sec. There it is. You can see without even cutting planes and making sections how graceful that canoe is. That is the steamed canoe with the open, graceful sheer, the open midsection. And if we turn off the model and see the lines, you can see how graceful that midship section is, how much like a kind of, not like a log and more like a real seaworthy vessel. We're going to toggle back and forth just for fun. There is the unsteamed canoe, and there's the steamed canoe. If we lay those two midship sections over one another, it gives you a really good kind of idea of just how dramatic that change is. That unsteamed canoe is about 1.5 feet across, and the steamed canoe is over 3 feet. So that's more than doubled in its beam. That's just looking at one section. The whole thing is moving though, as it happens. Just mind-blowing, really.
We didn't do any math.
We didn't do any math, but we've got about 80 people here.
Okay, well, you think about that. This is Macedon, Haida, and at one point it looked like this. A little bit later in time, my mother's mother was born here. Didn't look like that anymore. You know, changes were happening, and lots of changes had occurred to come to a certain point. Are we going to do the math or this math thing? Okay, you want to put some people out of this?
We could have a person on each end of this row stand up, and each end of the back row stand up. I don't know which one counts back there. Okay, we have a representative on each corner.
But anyway, you know, we're just doing that little exercise to illustrate something that happened back in time. So if we imagine that an epidemic came through today, and these 4 people that stood up were the survivors, you know, potentially the 5% that survived that event or a series of events. And you 4, you have, whether you know it or not, I mean, now I'm telling you, but whether you knew it or not, you are now carrying this burden
of carrying the culture forward for all those people to come. That's the way I feel about it. I feel like it's just really a responsibility to the entire culture to try and breathe as much life into it as possible. You know.
About 12 minutes. So thank you for your participation and your help, and yeah, it's a powerful thing.
So that is essentially what this is all about. It's really just trying to improve. It's trying to improve the health of the people, you know. And of course, you know, we live in a certain place. I live back home in Kasaan, you know, with my family, and it's important there. And also, kind of what we experience is that the things that help us seem to help our neighbors, seem to help their neighbors, and when we visit other places, we take the canoes there. It seems to help folks there. You know, it has an impact. Some will want to get involved, some may not, but nonetheless, these types of things seem to be good for the health of everyone, and you know, we're looking for a brighter future.
I like to say that these are is future generations of carvers in the canoe here.
Yeah.
But the culture in the canoe carving has survived, and today in Kasaan, Stormy is still building on that. Stormy created the Haida Canoe Revitalization Group with his family. I think kind of gave the introduction to that just there. But that organization, very centric, very focused on the canoe, but also on that broader culture. Three parts of the mission: carving new canoes, voyaging in canoes. Stormy and his family and friends have voyaged all over Southeast Alaska. And the third thing is that Stormy is a lifelong student of the canoe. His focus on the canoe is amazing. This is a drawing by Leslie, who spoke just before us. It's a beautiful drawing of Lutas here. There are a handful of canoes that have been drawn, and Stormy has studied them, and that's part of the mission as well. That's inside the Longhouse, just because it's a powerful place. When I met Stormy, he introduced me to kind of the challenges that he's already talked about. The difficulty of there not being the canoe carvers around that there were, as well as the other issue is that the handful of canoes that are still around, historic canoes, are in museums around the country and are inaccessible for Stormy to study. The most famous of those, perhaps, is in the American Museum of Natural History, 63-foot Western red cedar canoe. And this canoe is probably viewed by thousands of people every day, but is essentially inaccessible as something for a canoe carver in this part of the world to study.
I've never seen it.
Stormy has never seen it.
What's the creature on the front?
Creature on the front, I think it's there. I'm not sure.
No idea.
Not sure. But this idea that these canoes give us access to the ancient knowledge inspired Stormy and myself to get together to document historic canoes, to share that documentation with carvers, and to work with today's carvers to understand what these canoes are telling us. Did you talk about the Skagway canoe already? There is a canoe in the museum in Skagway.
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. Go ahead, Jason.
I'm rolling. So this canoe in Skagway is an exemplary example. It's a great example of that classic 30-foot working canoe. And Stormy went to that museum and got the curator so excited about the idea that we could document it that she invited us to come up and figured how to get us up there. We went up and we used a total station to measure the canoe on this one. We took about 1,000 measurements. We made a 3D model, It's a gorgeous little canoe. And this is the type of canoe that Stormy was pointing out on the beach. We made 6 sheets of drawings of this canoe, which may seem like overkill, but we were really excited about this canoe. And when we measure both the inside and the outside, we're able to make these sections that show the thickness of the hull in the sides and the bottom, anywhere we want in the canoe. And again, when we do this, when we look at these canoes, as Stormy said, the canoes that were carved by these master canoe carvers are incredible works of art. So now Stormy has that as an example in his carving shed. But of course now you all are experts on canoe carving, and you understand the issue, which is that if Stormy wants to carve or create the finished shape, he has to know the pristine shape. And that pristine shape is not represented in any canoe in any museum anywhere in the world. But it is still in the forest. So we finally found our way back here. We're over time, but we're going to go real fast. This is an example of the unseen shape. It's rough, but we got a grant from the National Park Service. We got a lot of support from other organizations to get up there and measure this canoe. Stormy's family was probably the primary support. Stephanie and Bonnie and even granddaughter Thavara were there on the project. This is our crew on site. It was extremely powerful to be in the presence of that canoe and to understand that the canoe masters had stood right there and carved that canoe. What we found there was a stump. If you picture the tree being felled to that side, the very bottom end of the canoe is cut off. That's the butt cut. You can see the canoe there, and then the treetop. We made models of the canoe, the butt cut, and the stump. We didn't know what we'd do with the stump and the butt cut, but we figured we'd make models of them anyways. Let's see what we got here. So, come on now. There we go. We used a technique called photogrammetry. We took almost 1,000 photographs of the canoe. Those photographs are taken from different angles. There's a program that makes a 3-dimensional model from those photographs of everything that we can photograph. So if we can't see it, we can't make a model of the underside of the canoe. But we can make it. There was a little bit of a drainage that ran under this canoe, so we were able to make a full model of the midsection of the canoe. This is Stephanie Hamar and I. Stephanie is also trained in photogrammetry. I also wanted to bring up Jack Becker, who is a Port Townsend local who pioneered the use of photogrammetry on small boats. And he told me I couldn't make him stand up, but he would raise his hand. Come on. All right. So between Jack Becker in the modern era using photogrammetry and Leslie Lincoln pioneering the documentation of these canoes back in the 80s, you've got some real talent in the town. We made a model. On the right-hand side is the model that we made from that canoe. Even more fun in this image. On the left-hand side, every blue rectangle in that photo, in that image, is a photo, the location of a photo that we took. So we kind of cocooned the canoe in photographs in order to make this model. We had archaeologists from University of Alaska doing drone mapping of the site. We had archaeologists working with Stormy to research the site to learn other things. Can you give us a quick rundown on that, Stormy?
Well, this site, initially we were attracted, of course, because of this remaining unfinished canoe. But it turns out there were a number of canoes built in this area. And so we came across, I think, 7 large cedar stumps that were cut sometime probably in the mid-1800s. We don't know exactly when. Anyway, we began referring to it as the Haida boatyard.
For every stump that they found a butt cut, a treetop, and a gap in the middle. That was very suggestive of a canoe. And that space where that canoe had been, again, was a powerful experience to be in that space.
Yeah, I don't know, well, maybe we have some pictures there, but also in that space, we would find fragments of red cedar that had apparently been split from inside the canoe.
So I'm going to just look at the model a little bit with you here. This is the model that we made. I think I'm going to fast forward through this a little bit. But the canoe, as you can see, has a crack right down the center of it there. The whole starboard side of the canoe split out away from the center line. There is a crack down the port side of it. There's trees that have fallen over each end. It's in rough shape. But we were able to model it, and we were able to learn a lot from it. What we were able to see is that this midsection was carved very nearly to a single growth ring of the tree. So the tree itself helped to create this cylindrical shape. Also, using this model-making technique, we're able to make a section there and measure that nice cylindrical shape. We're also able to approximate the size of the tree because we measured the top of the tree and the bottom of the tree. So this is something that's never been done, we can't expect with a canoe. From that, we were able to try to estimate the size of the canoe, the size of the tree, where the canoe was carved. Excuse me. If we get rid of that cone shape, you can see the line of the tree there, and we can see approximately how much of the tree has been removed there. Again, kind of a fascinating thing that you couldn't do if you didn't have access to that stump, that butt cut, etc. We think that it looks like perhaps the sapwood and bark were removed from this tree. It's about the right size for a western red cedar tree, which suggests that both the shape and the size of the canoe come very much from the tree itself. We'll continue to work with that model. From that model, we've made drawings, three pages of drawings this time. This one shows the general shape of the canoe as it is. We tried to reconstruct the canoe by understanding how it had deteriorated, to reconstruct sections, to kind of try to make as carved model. That's very speculative, but we made a lot of notes about how we made those speculations. This photo right here I love. This is the village of Old Kasaan, which was the village closest to the canoe. What I love is that those canoes that came from that site that Stormy was measuring could be in this photo right here. It's the right time period. Those could be those canoes. The other thing that's pretty great is that Stormy's family lived in this village and could have carved those canoes. And this canoe in this grove is connecting the knowledge of Stormy with the knowledge of his ancestors. And that's where we're at with that project. What's next? You want to talk about other canoes, Stormy?
Well, as you can see, we're get the time check here. Anyway, we're looking at another canoe in Southeast Alaska here in this photo, and you can see what rough shape it's in. You can see what rough shape the earlier one was in, and we feel that it's critical to document any other known canoes while we can. We watched the other one deteriorate, since it was found, and I think if we would have waited much longer, we wouldn't have gotten any information from it. And we did get some. This is kind of and the more canoes that we look at in the forest, the more we can recognize differences or similarities, make comparisons. This is kind of an incredible example, really finely carved, unfinished canoe here. We're just looking at the stern end. But, I think kind of where we end up in this talk is what we want to do next. We want to get back out into the forest and, document another dozen, or if we can find more, document more before it's too late. And that's really where you folks may be able to help us, or, we didn't get into this too much earlier, but, really, it's all of you and everyone who talks about, thinks about, or in any way is involved in these projects. Every single one of you is critically important. If you're talking to someone, letting them know what we're doing, if you're one of those folks that has a big old wallet you have carrying a suitcase, you can make a donation.
You can go to that link right there, right now.
It's incredibly expensive, and we're in large part kind of self-funded, and that means from whatever odd jobs we have, we or our very supportive wives and wherever they're all at, we make some things happen, but you all may have connections, and it's. I brought up that money thing because it's probably the most uncomfortable part of. Jason and I we've never sold anything in our lives. Kind of talking for you there, Jason. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Hopefully he sells his sailboat. But really, it may be you, but it may be your connections. Some of the connections we made with people on the street, in the museum, a family that came through on a sailboat. You just never know what kind of connection might be the one. So, I think that, all of you connecting us in whatever way that you can do that is incredibly helpful.
And I guess I would just add on to that Leslie mentioned that at 4 o'clock we're having kind of an open house with lines drawings up in the second floor of the Maritime Center. We'd love to have an ongoing conversation with you all. We would love feedback. We'd love your take from all of the various expertises you bring to this. And as Stormy says, your thoughts of who we should connect with as individuals and institutions. And